All right, guys. So welcome to session two of this year's sit and go boot camp. Um, Pretty pumped for this session. Usually, this session is one of players' favorites because it deals with a topic that we all face every single day. It's usually the hot topic of discussion whenever we're discussing strategy. What should I have shoved here? What are the ICM calculations? You pull out sit and go wizard, ICMizer, and you're doing calculations to figure out what's the best shoving range, all-in calling range. So we're going to really analyze the all-in game and just figure out what's better, raising or shoving. We're going to also discuss some common beliefs that are out there in terms of when you have to start shoving all in. This will definitely be a nice complement to the first session where we talked about just the idea of how to exploit regs. When regs aren't going to flat, they're going to three bet or fold. Um, Sorry about that. When they're going to just three bet or fold, how we can start raising with any two cards through them. We are going to again take that concept and apply it to the all-in game, or figuring out whether we could raise or go all in. So we're going to look at a variety of spots, and really today it's going to be hand histories. It's going to be going through specific hands, going through calculations, and when I typically do a video, um, when I do a video that I post, it's a concept video. I usually have the time to pause and set up the hands. So one thing I'll ask that you guys just bear with me for a little bit, because we are going to go through hands, we are going to go through calculations. I'm also going to ask you guys for your input. Hey, what should this range be? So I'm going to be going kind of on the fly in terms of analyzing different ranges, different spots. So as I'm setting up the hands in Card Runners EV and Sit and Go Wizard, obviously just bear with me for a couple minutes as we go through there. But today is mainly going to be hand histories, and I really want your guys' input as well. If you think I should change a range, if you have a specific scenario, say, hey, what if this is a chip EV spot? We can try to do that as well. But as I was saying actually to some players before this session, I'm going to do my best to give you guidelines, give you concepts to apply to your game. Obviously, we're all playing different game types from 6 max through 180s. We face different situations all the time. Are we on the bubble, in the money? Are we far away from the bubble? Are we pre-final table? All of those different scenarios require different calculations. Sometimes it's chip EV, sometimes it's dollar EV, sometimes the ICM tax is really high, sometimes the ICM tax is really low. And depending upon those scenarios will be dependent upon how wide, essentially we can call an all in, how wide players tend to three bet us. And obviously antes, pre-ante and post-ante is going to play a very important role as well. So I obviously can't go through every single hand and every single scenario, or we'll be here for hours. But use the forum, post your specific hands. So two things I'll say about it is, one, use the tools that I'm using. If you don't want to go out and buy Card Runners EV or Hold'em Resources Calculator or other programs that can do what I'm about to show you, that's fine. I understand that expenses like that they can add up. $100 here, $100 there. It certainly adds up. So use myself, use the Skype group, use the forum. Say, hey, here's my 180-man hand. Here's my 18-man hand. What works best here? So utilize those resources then, essentially those free resources, to post your own specific scenario if we didn't cover that in today's session. So I will do my best there to nail down as many scenarios as I can get through today. Guys, give me 1 second. All right. So with that being said, let's jump into it. So what we're going to again cover today, and I talked a little bit about this already, but we're going to look at the myth of the when we need to shove all in. There are we'll look a lot at the button and small blind spots when we can expect to get three bet are probably our most common times where we're going to be shoving wide, shoving all in, and sometimes with any two cards, or when players might three bet us a little bit wider. So those are the situations we're going to analyze today. Of course, kind of the overriding theme of this whole course is plus EV versus optimal play. As you'll see, we can always calculate plus EV plays, but what's going to be the best? And of course, we're going to talk about exploiting regs to get an edge over them. So let's jump right into the scenario. So really, we're going to go through 4 specific scenarios and kind of mess around with calculations with each of them. Very common scenarios. Most of the scenarios are going to be 12 big blinds or less, raising from either the button or the small blind, and really just analyzing what's best, raising or shoving. So let's take a look right now and tell me what you guys think about this particular spot. And I'll try to set up the scenario here. I just did I set up this hand just a sit and go wizard, and again, if you're using ICMizer, I know that's more popular, it's probably a better tool. It really doesn't matter for our purposes today. But this is a 9-man game. 6 players left, big blind 200. We are on the button with a 2500 stack. The small blind has a 1500 stack, and the big blind has a 2K stack. Okay, so again, the big blind has a 2000 stack, so he's got a 10 big blind stack. The small blind has a 1500 stack, so 7.5 big blinds. And we have king 10 off on the button. 6 players left. The rest of the players at the table have average stacks. And we have what, 12.5 big blinds. Yeah, sorry. So that's a good question. We are going to assume that the small blind and big blind are regs. Okay. For our purposes today, we're going to assume that we're not going to get called pre-flop. We're not going to be going post-flop. So this is important to note that this is for regs. I was going to point that out after, but maybe it would have been better if I would have pointed that out ahead of time. We're going to be exploiting regs. Guys that are playing that ABC strategy, guys that, like in this situation, as regs in the big blind and small blind, they are not going to be flatting our raise. So the question is, what's the best play? Here's what most players do, and again, this is pre-ante. What most players do is they say, hey, should I have just shoved, whatever hand, king 10, ace deuce off, jack 7 suited, what should I have done with those hands here? And in general, king 10, queen 9, those types of hands would have been a plus EV shove. Because we feel that we're committed to those stacks. So we say, you know what, we might as well just shove it all in because we don't want to raise fold or raise call or whatever you want to do. We'll just shove it all in. And if you throw this in your ICM calculator, you'll see, if you just follow my cursor here, that it says the difference percentage is 0.31. So this is a plus dollar EV play of 0.31%, right? Obviously depends on 3-betting ranges, but so this will lead into my next question. Obviously, I just based this upon the ranges that Sit and Go Wizard preloaded in there. Yes, we always have to change ranges. Sometimes player will be tighter, looser. It really doesn't matter a whole lot for our purposes today what it's going to be, because we're comparing shoving versus raising given the same ranges, whether it's 14% versus 14%, whatever it might be. So here, if we shove king 10, well, the big blind call with 13%, small blind call with 15%. Fine. So if you put this in your own ICM calculator, you were analyzing your own game, you would look at this and say, well, pretty solid, pretty plus EV shove. Here's the hands we can play. We can play 34.5% of our hands. Here's the hands we can shove, and that's what's in your mind as the next time that comes around. Okay, and as we went through, as I was going through here, I looked at some of the stuff that you guys were typing in. We got some people saying shove, shove, shove. Some people saying raise fold, shove. And you wouldn't be wrong here to say shove. Okay? But again, for our purposes, let's take a look at what the concept of raising, how that can apply, and how the 3-betting ranges affect things. So I see a lot of questions kind of popping in here. If you keep shoving any 2 against the reg, eventually they know what you're doing and they will widen their range of call. I think the best play in scenario will be the raise fold. Min raise will be the same as shoving. They will fold the raise the same way they fold the shove. So That's kind of kind of what we're about to get into. So the question that I pose to you guys is, given the stack distribution here, with a 7.5 big blind in the small blind and a 10 big blind stack in the big blind versus our 12.5 big blind stack, would you assume that their three betting ranges are going to be pretty equal or pretty close to being equal to their all-in shoving range or their all-in calling range? So three betting ranges are going to equal all-in calling ranges. So Alex, you said no. Alan says yes. Who says yes? Who says no? So let's fire away. Again, so the stipulation is for regs. Yes. For guys, forget about history. We're not dealing with history right now. We'll talk about the history in a second. Any history, any notes, anything like that is going to be on top of this stuff. If you know a guy, that one single guy three bets you 100% of the time, obviously that applies to that single guy. We can't do that in this situation. We can only base it upon general assumptions. So for most regs in this situation, three betting ranges are going to be very similar to all-in calling ranges when they don't assume any fold equity, which typically they don't with 10 big blinds or less. So let's take a look at that real quick. So what I pulled up here is Card Runners EV again, and I set up the same exact scenario. 100, 200 stacks are all the same. You see 2500, 1500, 2K. And we're going to raise to 400 with King 10 off. And I'm going to give roughly the same three betting ranges of King Jack suited, Ace 8 off, Ace 5 suited. Maybe they call King Queen. And a similar 14% range for the 10 big blind stack, who many times will expect to show down his hand. Okay, when guys three bet with their 10 big blind stack, many times they expect to show down their hand, so it's usually going to be more of a value range. So Alex, I'll answer your question here in a second. Even without history, there are just so many marginal hands that they can find shoves with that they can't call. Ace deuce suited, Ace 7 suited. Maybe they call those, maybe they don't. I included those hands. This is for a 9-man game, so for you 180-man guys, this might feel a little bit tight, certainly. Dealing in more chip EV, we can take a look at that. So again, I know we have a lot of different game types, but kind of bear with me here to show the differences. Again, I want to reiterate, this situation is much different than if I have 2500 and somebody else has 2500 stack. They can assume fold equity in that spot, right? Then we can start widening three betting ranges a little bit more, and we're going to get into that. In this situation, we're talking 7.5 and 10 big blind stacks. And most players, 95% of players, are pretty much going to assume no fold equity, assuming they don't have tons and tons of history on you. Okay? So I guess I'll add that caveat in there that, okay, assuming you don't have ridiculous history against somebody and are always in a metagame battle, or in a leveling battle with them, in general, you're going to have ranges something like this. Maybe it's a little bit tighter, maybe a little bit looser. But right now, I actually don't really care what those ranges are, because what I'm saying is we're comparing it to the ranges that we used. Actually, here's the screenshot that I took from before. We're just using the same ranges comparing shoving versus raising. So whether it's 13% or whether it's 18%, I'm just making them equal for our purposes here. So remember, this is 0.31. So we should take a look at, is raising better here? Can we raise fold? I don't set overall. I don't set the overcall range for the big blind in this situation, because it actually doesn't matter, because we're still going to be folding. We're going to be raise folding in these scenarios. So whether the small blind three bets and the big blind three bets him, it doesn't matter for our purposes, because we're going to account for the big blind's three bet when the small blind folds anyway. So those percentages are accounted for. The overcall only comes into play, obviously, when we just shove it all in. And that's what this is accounting for here. Okay, so let's just run this real quick. Alright, so you can see in this spot it's 0.6%. It's pretty much double the EV of the shove. Okay? It's double the EV of the shove. This is important because when players in this situation have Queen Jack, Ace 5, King 10, King Jack, they say, well, I have a good hand, I'm just going to shove it. And you would be right to shove it in terms of making a profitable play. But if you can make the assumption, which is a good assumption to make, it's not a stretch, to assume that, one second, Alex, if you can make the assumption that their 3-betting ranges aren't going to all of a sudden be drastically different, or they're going to be pretty equal to their all-in calling range, then a raise is going to be significantly better, even versus a 7.5 effective stack. So that doesn't mean you should fold to the reshove. Let's take a look. So let's look at the small blind was the short stack, right? So let's take a look. Instead of folding to him, let's call him. So 0.6. So we're going to compare it to 0.6. .53. So it's kind of close. It's kind of close. Would you be totally wrong to call? No. Folding's a little bit better. You'll see like that 7 big blind mark is where so you're at 7.5 big blinds here that I put. 7 big blinds, 6.5 big blinds is where you need to start calling a little bit more, raise calling. But 7.5 big blinds and above is where you can definitely still raise fold if you feel that, you know, King 10 isn't performing well. And again, this is where I'd say you definitely need to go through on your own and do these calculations, because we can start changing these ranges up all day and we'll spend hours here figuring out ranges. But the most important part here is that in a standard shove spot versus regs, raising is twice as profitable as shoving all in. They're still better than the open shove. Both are still better than open shoving, because the raise combines the EV of fold equity, of the it combines it all together. So when we compare whether we should raise call or raise fold versus each other, you compare raise folding versus raise calling. So both are better than shoving, because this is still factoring in the when the small blind folds, the big blind we're raise folding again. So this is factoring in everything. Okay, so it's twice as profitable. Okay, I'm not going to do it right now, but what I'm going to do in a couple hands is go through about how it looks like with any 2 cards. Because if we take a look at this, this says if you just follow the strict, essentially we're 10 big blinds effective here. If you follow the strict, I have to shove or fold and there is no raising, then that limits your hands to 34, 35% of hands, right? That limits you to hands that you feel comfortable with shoving all in. What I'll show you in a bit is that this can be any 2 cards. Let's just, now I'm going to go kind of fly off the seat of my pants here. This is dollar EV. Let's just change things to real quick. It shouldn't be too difficult to change it to chip EV. And we can compare. So you can see you should shove, depending on what you set your edge as, but 119 plus chip EV. How many big blinds should in the same situation shove? Hold on for a second, I'll get to that in a bit. So here's a chip EV calculation. Same scenario, 119 chips is with King 10. I think I should be able to change this to cash game mode. Actually, I can do this in 2 seconds. So this is where I was saying, guys, bear with me real quick. We're kind of just gonna go with it. So let's set up the situation again. Yeah, I guess I could have just done that as well. But this will be This will make it real easy. Because I want it to be just, pure chip EV. So this will take me 2 seconds. So I'm just inputting that. Cache game mode. Start tree. We're going to raise with King 10 off. And now I bet you raise calling might be a little bit better. So I think there was like a 15% range, something like that. I know, something like that. And again, for chip EV, it might be even a little bit wider, but for our purposes, but also their calling range in the chip EV situation is going to be wider as well. So I don't necessarily care too much about nailing down their specific ranges, per se. It's comparing shoving versus calling with those predefined ranges. That's what we're after. I think we were something like that. And let's take a look. And it actually looks pretty similar. The raise, let's see if calling's any better. Yep, so here you can see raise calling would be a little bit better versus the small blind. Let's see how it looks with this guy in a chip EV situation. And you can see for you 180-man guys, you're probably more used to these chip EV calculations where you can call wider than certainly you can in a 9-man game with 6 left. Okay, so we shouldn't be calling the big blind. We should be calling the come on, click it. I don't know why it's not working, but that's okay. Chip EV is obviously a little bit different. The main point is, again, raise calling can be a little bit better against a small blind in a chip EV scenario. But what it also allows you to do is understand that you can not necessarily just open 79% of hands, or in the 9-man situation open up 35% of hands for a shove. We can start opening up any 2 cards, which I'll get into doing any 2 card calculation in a second. So in a 9-man game, 6 left, I think now we should min raise call, because we still have a couple fold equity spots, and winning we get 2 away from the bubbles. That doesn't mean I want to make a negative EV play, or not necessarily negative EV. Could you argue that calling the small blind stack, even though it's slightly lower profitability compared to raise folding, that there should be some future game situations where you can pick up a bigger stack, you can run over the table? Absolutely. That's another factor to add on. That's fine. If you know to do that you can run over the table. I'm not going to make that assumption of what each person can do with their bigger stack. Some players are better with a bigger stack, some players aren't. Our purposes are for comparing the calculations of raising versus shoving. So that if you can do this on your own, if you can know how to do these calculations, and you say, well, raise folding is 0.6, but raise calling is 0.5, but you know what? I'll make the assumption, because it's really tough to calculate, because it's quite subjective, but if I make the assumption here that, with this bigger stack, we have a chip lead. We have a chip lead close to the bubble. Close to the bubble, we can really exploit ICM and run over the table and give ourselves a better opportunity to come in first. Absolutely, that's fine. That's fine. There are going to be some times, though, we use King 10. King 10's a good hand. As you'll see, the point of using this play is you can start doing it with any 2 cards again, and not just stick to what you're capable of calling with or shoving with. So if I was a small blind here, I'll sometimes shove over this min raise with a low pocket pair, but fold if I get shoved on directly. Okay, so let me read that again. If I was a small blind, I will sometimes shove over this min raise with a low pocket pair, but fold if I get shoved on directly. Means vice versa. If I shove as the button, I always have the feeling to scare out some hands and don't have any more decisions after someone shoves. So you're making the easy decision to just shove because you know it's a plus EV play, right? And that's what I said back in session 1, that if you feel that you're not comfortable with these strategies, if you don't feel that you're not comfortable with having a proper race call or race fold range, or not sure if you're doing it in the right spot, then yes, making the plus EV shove is going to be your better option, because at least you know you're making a right play. But if you want to get even more profitable, understanding when to mix in the raise instead of the shove, as you can see, is going to be double the profitability in a dollar EV situation. And it's going to be, when taking a good hand that's going to perform well in a chip EV situation, many times you're not really going to see a huge discrepancy between shoving and raise calling with a good hand, for obvious reason. It's a good hand that has good equity. But where it comes in and play with a chip EV situation is allowing you to play more hands, not feeling you always have to shove all in, risk your stack to win the same amount. So again, my point is, I want to always try to find the best spot. Is it necessarily the easiest play to make? No, but you know, if it was easy, then everybody would do it, right? That's the old cliche. And Sebastian, you are also correct in that, yes, sometimes players might 3-bet a few more hands than they would call the all-in. But is the discrepancy, is the difference, or the gap, I'll pick a synonym, is the gap between their 3-betting range and their all-in calling range enough such that it forces you to make the shove instead of the raise? And that's what we're going to also get into here in a couple minutes. Okay, so a lot of good questions, guys. I'm glad you asked them, because obviously, you know, the calculation shows one thing, but there's always a lot of other variables to consider. And really, how you consider those variables is kind of what makes us each a little bit different, and why some players are even more profitable than others. So like Alex, like you said, hey, if I make this, maybe it's not the most profitable at this specific time, but if I can account for future scenarios and give myself a chip lead, then this might actually be the more plus EV play. It's actually called the gigabet issue or theory. It was on 2+2, where he said, even if I could take a slightly negative EV play, but it puts me into a new category of chips if I win that pot, so that I can finish in first place more often, then I'm willing to take that play. Here we're not really talking about negative EV plays. We're talking about what's the most profitable play at that time. So as we saw, raising in this situation is going to be much more profitable than shoving. Okay, raise folding is going to be more profitable than shoving. Raise calling is slightly less profitable than raise folding, but has some future game considerations. So it's a good point to bring up. Hopefully everybody understands that. If you don't, again, you know, we can talk after. But you know, these are all good variables and things to think about. But it's okay to make the assumption that when a player has 10 big blinds or less, their fold equity is minimal. Maybe it's a little bit, their 3-betting range is a little bit different, but many times it's not. Okay? And again, if it is, if you notice, guys, and we're going to get into a scenario where literally, you know, you guys might think that I prepare for these sessions like weeks and weeks in advance, and I do have these things prepared, but 2 days ago I'm talking to one of the guys I'm coaching, and he brought up a situation where it was a high ICM situation. He asked me, should I raise call here or should I just shove? Because the guy that was in the big blind with a 10 big blind stack, he shoved on him ultra wide and has a reputation for shoving on him ultra wide, even with 10 big blinds. So it was a really interesting situation that I'm going to put, you know, even though it was just 2 days ago, I'm going to put into today's session, which I think illustrates our point here about what do we do when guys start 3-betting. So I always try to take what you guys are asking me on a daily basis and input it into the videos, because I think, you know, real examples rather than me making up something is even better. Okay, so now let's get into the small blind, essentially 10 big blind versus 10 big blind. This, in terms of this game, this was an 18-man game, pre-final table. You can see there's 6 players there. What I did was, for our calculation purposes, was make the assumption that there were also 6 players on the other table. So while many players might play pure chip EV pre-final table of an 18-man, And I don't necessarily say that's completely wrong, but I wanted to get really exact, so I'm still going to do dollar EV here, which I can do in Card Runners EV. What I assume is 6 players on the other table, whatever the difference is in terms of total chips involved at this table, I put on the other table, spread out among those players, and we can pretty much get a value for our stack. So if you take a look here, I want to talk about two main things when considering this play. Queen 4 off, right, will essentially say about 10 big blinds and 10 big blinds. So the question is, what do we do? Okay, so who says we should shove here? Who says we should fold here? And in terms of the player, what I want to say is the player actually has reggy looking stats. He was actually a random. He was a losing player. So what I want to say is assume this is just a random, and then let's assume that he's a reg. So if he's a random, what are you guys doing? And by random, I mean losing player, fishy player. And again, by random, I also mean he can also call our raise here. They can do that. They do weird stuff. What's the bubble factor for pre-final table of an 18-man? It's minimal. 1.1, 1.2 maybe. Usually 1.2 with 9 left, so it's probably a little bit less than that. Wow, I'm getting all sorts of answers. Limp, limp, fold, 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 limp, limp, fold. Push, raise, fold for reg, ship. Wow, so we got all sorts of stuff. I don't want to talk about limping right now because that's going to be in part 3. When to limp versus random players, so we'll get to that. I don't want to limp here though in this situation. Versus a random, if I don't know anything about this guy, this is a pretty standard shove in my opinion. I wouldn't fold versus a random. I'm pretty sure I did a calculation for this. Pre-ante, I'm still shoving here. What do you guys think is I think I'm going to get different answers here depending on whether you play 9-mans, 18-mans, or 180-mans. But again, this is an 18-man versus a random player. Oh, here we go. It depends on the situation. My shoving range against a random is whatever the situation dictates. Sometimes it's any 2 cards. So I put about a 22% calling range on a random here. Does anybody disagree with that? Agree with that? Sometimes it can be tighter. Sometimes it can be looser. I believe I set this up as an 18-man. Yep. You know, I'd say this is relatively close. Okay, so if it's tighter, that's obviously better for us, right? So I put it as, so even if you think this is tighter, then that's going to be better for us. But let's just say 22% on average. Some people are going to differ. This is a plus EV shove, right? 0.15. Okay? 0.15. So first thing I want to point out is this is a plus EV shove. If you're not shoving this, you should. 2, this goes back to randoms versus regs. Randoms, I'm not screwing around here with Queen 4 and min raising because I don't know what they're going to do. They might flat you, which you're going to hate life if they do. So I'm just going to make the plus EV shove. Okay? So we can make the plus EV shove here with Queen 4 offsuit. And we can pretty much shove close to any 2 cards pretty profitably here, given this range. Okay? So our question, so now I want to get away from the randoms. So everybody, we just talked about random players, players that are going to do all sorts of stuff. Take that out of your head. We're done with that now. I just wanted to prove that this is a plus EV shove versus a random. It's going to be a plus EV shove versus a reg. Regs, maybe they're going to call a little bit wider, tighter, whatever you think. But we're just going to compare percentages. Regardless of necessarily how wide you think they're going to be in this spot. We can debate up and down whether a good reg or a bad reg. whatever it is. Um, what I want to show is, do you know whether in, I can also put some stacks from other table into ICM? I believe you can. I believe in Hold'em Resources and ICMizer. Now I've messed around with Hold'em Resources calculator, but I haven't gone through it extensively in a situation like this. I know you can in ICMizer. You can here in this program, like if you see here, I gave everybody their stacks, and then on the other table I just took, there's 27,000 chips in an 18-man, subtracted how many were at that table, spread it among, equally among those players. So all that matters really is that there's 6 other players that have that many total chips. So see if there's an option to do that in Hold'em Resources Calculator. I apologize, I don't know that. But that's the way to do it. So what we want to do now is, what I want to compare is, and this is where we get into really, an important concept, is the 10 big blind shove, right? A lot of us will take this queen forehand, we'll copy and paste the raw text, we'll put it in the ICMizer, we're going to put it into Hold'em Resources Calculator, we're going to put it into Sit and Go Wizard, and it's going to spit out 0.15, 0.12, whatever your ranges are. If you put it in the Nash ranges, it's going to pop out a range for Nash. So, and you're going to go on your merry way and be happy with the plus EV play. So what I'm going to do is say, do we have to shove? Do we have to? And obviously that's kind of like the loaded question, because I think we all kind of know the route that we're going to take here, but it's important to see it. All right. So first, I'm actually going to, if you min raise in the small blind, that's fine. If you get away with that, great. I always advocate raising a little bit more out of the small blind. Give players a little bit less room to 3-bet. If you're a little bit deeper, even give them less room to flat. The least amount you have to risk, though, the better. But here, queen 4, I'm going to assume a similar 3-betting range. Okay? Similar 3-betting range. And again, I'm making that assumption because if I go back to here, as this player, assuming he's a reg, there's very little assumed fold equity. Okay? Very little assumed fold equity. There should be. Again, unless you have that history. If you have that history, that's when you start deviating and making different plays. But for our purposes, average reg, is the majority of players you're going to be facing, in terms of regs, the average reg is going to assume no fold equity here. And let's just give them the 22% 3-betting range. And of course we're going to raise fold. I think we were comparing what? 0.15. You can see raise folding, even with a 10 big blind stack, is 0.4. Close to 3 times as profitable. Okay? Now, the question is, how short can we do this to where we essentially commit ourselves? So let's go into stacks, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself a 9 big blind stack. And let's give the other guy 9 big blinds as well, effective. So we're doing 9 big blinds effective. Can we raise fold with 9 big blinds? 0.41. Okay. Now compare that to, do we feel that we're committed to this, to the 3-bet? So we compare the fold versus a call. 0.41 versus 0.21. So we're not there yet. All right. So what if we go stacks? So what if we go even lower? 1200 stack, 1200 stack. All right, so what do we got? 8 big blinds now? So can we raise fold with 8 big blinds? 0.42. Let's compare that versus a call. 0.28. Raise folding with 8 big blinds is still better than raise calling, which is also still much better than shoving all in. So actually, I'll go back. I'll go back at the end in a second. So the question is, how short can we be to where raise calling, you're committed so that you have to raise call, and that's going to be better than raise folding. So I already know the answer. It's 6.5 big blinds. Now, with that being said, so you're going to say, wow, I can really raise fold with down to 6.5 big blinds. From a technical standpoint, yes. Do I recommend that? No. Why don't I recommend it? Because I don't want to raise fold and then leave myself with a desperate stack of 4 big blinds or so. I don't want to do that. What I will do though is I will raise fold down to 8 big blinds, and still, if I have to raise fold there, I'll still have a stack that I have some fold equity with, and I'll move on. There is arguments of, does that hamper your future equity? And there's an element of that, yes. But I'd rather make this play and not commit my entire stack to win the same amount with hands like Queen 4 offsuit, with hands like 7 deuce offsuit. I don't have to assume that the big blind. If you assume that the big blind is going to 3-bet as the blind as you get shorter stacked, remember what we're always comparing that to. We're not comparing it to itself. We're comparing it to a shove or a raise call, and those ranges are going to widen as well. So my point isn't to say should it be 22% or 19%. We're comparing the raise versus this range and a shove versus the same ranges. When we put in the sit and go wizard, that's what we're comparing. So yeah, of course, is the 22 going to go to 25% and 28%? Of course. It's definitely going to get wider, but you're always comparing one versus the other, assuming very similar ranges. Okay, and again, we're going to get into what if somebody starts 3-betting, a little bit wider. But why don't we actually get into that right now? Actually, do I have that set up for? Actually, I think I'll get into that. We can do it right now. We can mess around with it right now. So let's go back to where we were. And if you remember, the shove all in with Queen 4 off was like 0.12, I think it was, something like that. So what we want to see is how wide does this 0.15? So this, how wide does somebody have to 3-bet here to make a shove better than a raise? So again, I don't care about the range. I care about the frequency because we're not calling. So let me just put in a bunch of hands. I'll keep it somewhat legit. Let's go to 30%. So even though in my mind there should be very little perceived fold equity, let's assume that that player is going to 3-bet us a little wide. I think, Sebastian, you mentioned earlier, well, I might 3-bet a few extra pocket pairs. Well, are those few extra hands that somebody might add in, is that going to force the raise to be better, or to force the raise to be worse than the shove? So let's take a look. 0.25. So even if we increase this 3-betting range to 30%, it's still more profitable than the shove. 0.19. This is still more profitable as we go to 34%. Let's add in some more of this stuff. 35%. 0.15. So there we are. So they have to pretty much increase their 3-betting range by more than 10% for a shove to be equal to a raise, or you could say vice versa. I'd get 3-bet wide if I use this strategy versus another crush the donks member. I would say yes and no, because okay, I'm telling this to you guys, right? And you know that if you spot somebody doing this, that you should be able to 3-bet them with any 2 cards. We talked about this last week in the sense that, one, that's still very difficult to do, right? It's very, very difficult to do in this spot, because in this spot, if we go back to here, your initial intuition is to assume no fold equity, typically, unless you have a ton of history, right? So unless you have that history, it's really tough to do. And even if you do have that history, do you know for a fact 100% that the person's raise folding with 100 or raising with 100% of their range? So that's, you have to know that somebody is doing this before you can start exploiting them, because your exploitable play might be wrong as well if you're incorrect. So it's still very tough to do, but there are definitely some regs that battle each other and do get into some of these battles, and that's fine. How many members are on the site now? A couple hundred. That's nothing compared to obviously how many players you're going to be seeing in your games on a regular basis. And still, you're not really going to have those major leveling battles. But if you do, you also know how to exploit it. So what I'd like to do here is, let's what happens if we have any 2 cards now? So there's obviously a calling range, right? Let's talk about that. So let's go any 2 cards. Let's go back to the 23%, something like that. Something. So I think that was close to what we had. And now what I'm going to do is, obviously we're going to have a raise call and a raise folding range. So we're going to call, we're going to fold. Let's do this. I think I should be able to do this. I'm going to click this little fun button right here. This is another powerful tool with this program. The maximum exploitive play. So what hands can we raise call with? What hands can we raise fold with? So let's see what it pumps out. Did it work? Oh great, it's not responding. That's always fun. Our first technical error of the day. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now we don't have Queen 4, right? We have any hand. Let's figure out what hands we can open up with, what hands we have to fold. So let's start here. So here you can see, and this is the grid. It says every hand you could have. Here's the here's the $EV figures of what you can of each hand essentially. So even with 3 deuce offsuit, raise folding is 0.35. Okay. Yeah, 3 deuce offsuit is 0.35. All right. Now we're going to raise call with this range. Ace deuce suited, ace 5 off, pocket deuces, king 10 suited. So that would be your optimal calling range in this play versus this type of 3-betting range. Okay. So does that make sense so far, guys? You said Queen 4 almost got there. All right, so makes sense. Now I just want to do one more thing. I just thought about this as we're going. As I said, bear with me as we do this. I want you to look at 3 deuce offsuit there, 0.35. Let's open shove. Let's see what 3 deuce offsuit is if we have to shove. 0.043. So that's pretty much a break-even shove. And I bet you many times, like I showed you guys Queen 4, and many of you were saying this is a fold in terms of just shoving. If we don't even consider raising, we'd say, oh, I'd rather just fold here than shove. Well, we already showed that Queen 4 was a pretty profitable shove. But what if I had 3 deuce offsuit here? Most of you would just say, it's a shitty hand. Move on. Let's just fold it. And you want to know what? You might have been right, because 0.043 is based upon this predefined calling range. If this guy's just a little bit wider, this probably becomes negative. Yeah, so it becomes negative now if this guy's a little bit wider. So 3 deuce off may be a fold, it may be a shove. I'm sure most of you are probably more comfortable with a fold. But if you can understand that now you don't need to just shove all in versus a reg, you can raise instead. I just showed you that 3 deuce off to raise fold with 10 big blinds is 0.32, essentially 3 times as profitable, right? So, or more than that actually. I guess you could say like 30 times as profitable. So does that make sense? So it's not just even about having the Queen 4 offsuit type of hand. It's allowing you to have the confidence to know that since you know that you don't have to shove every time with 10 big blinds, or 9 big blinds and you can just raise, now you know, hey, if you have 3 deuce off, you don't have to instantly fold and feel you're risking your entire stack with this shitty hand. And many times we don't know someone's exact range. We also have to give ourselves a cushion. But now you know, hey, I can just raise here instead of shove all in. And that's a very powerful tool. And so it has a double effect. One is it's more profitable than shoving. Two is it might allow you to play more hands in a profitable scenario instead of just folding. So it's really important. And this, again, just like the concept we talked about in session 1 in terms of raising with any 2 cards, this is a situation that comes up non-stop. And so think about if you can increase your profitability on this very common play, how much of a profound effect that'll have on your game. I think when you get started, so there's a question from Simim. I think when you get started to play sit and goes, everybody, random players, underrate the value of chips and shove 10, 12, 15 because you feel committed. Maybe you feel committed. You don't feel comfortable with the concept of raising. Many times people like to see queen 10. They don't like to see queen 4, so they raise it, even though it doesn't really make a whole hell of a lot of a difference, as we just showed. So when you're just starting out, many times I recommend starting with the basic strategy, but the quicker you can learn to add in this stuff, the better. Alan, I made huge ROI increases using this tactic after the first. Yeah, Alan. So you were with us, from the first sit and go course, a year and a half back. So that's great that you've seen ROI increases. Lucas, you said to answer my question. I must have missed it. What would you do if you had, say, less than? So let me read that again. What would you do if you had, let's say, 10 big blinds sitting in the small blind, and the big blind had 6.5 big blinds? Would you raise fold then? Are we talking chip EV? Are we talking bubble? There's other variables there, and that's why I said we can't get into every what-if scenario. I'd probably call a 6.5 big blind stack, depending on what my hand was. I mean, maybe if I had 3 deuce offsuit, I may not even call if I feel committed. And this is pre-ante as well. We're not even considering post-ante yet. That's another thing, guys, I actually forgot. So real quick, Lucas, to answer your question, it all depends. If you can find a specific hand, what I'd say is post it in the forum or the Skype chat after, and let's analyze it. Because there are so many other variables than just say, what if you had 10, what if you had 6.5? Does this mean also, so another question, does this mean also that the hands I mean to shove there, top of range, I should raise call so I don't always fold to 3-bet? Yeah, so with ace-king, I'm going to be doing the same thing as well. I also want to disguise my hand in that sense, in that I'm not just shoving my good hands and min-raise folding my 3 deuce offsuit. Man, I wish I got the hand history from a game that I was playing on Merge. I was playing against another top reg who was in the big blind, and I had ace-jack. And we both had like 11 big blinds effective. And I just kept doing what I normally do, and because I was already raising before, and I just raised again. And he actually 3-betted me kind of wide in that spot, which I expected him to do as well. And I flipped over ace-jack. So what's the point of that basic story? The point of it is, I have ace-jack, I have ace-king, I have pocket aces. In this same spot, I'm going to be min-raising, because I'm also going to do the same thing with 3 deuce off. So while this strategy in general is very out of balance, in terms of being able to open any 2 cards but only calling with a small percentage in relation, I guess I want to add a little bit balance in there in terms of I'm also going to do it with all my hands and not just my trash hands. What if the big blind is a fish who might flat? Yeah, that's what we talked about before. Remember I said if this is a random and he could call the raise, I'm making the plus EV play. That's always the caveat to the first session strategy and the strategies in this session. If you have randoms there, make the plus EV play, because I don't know if raising here is plus EV or not. As a matter of fact, it might be negative EV if they do certain plays, like flat or 3-bet you 2 wide or do whatever. So I'm just going to make the plus EV shove, and that's why I showed that as the first example. All right, so we good with that? So it sounds like never shoving again with 10 big blinds. Okay, so I was going to kind of draw a conclusion at that at the end, but I'll answer it now. let's say, and this is where you guys need to use your own mind in this and understand your table image. Let's say this was folded around to us, and I raise here, and the guy shoves over top of me, and I fold. Right? Let's say we have to raise fold here. Maybe the guy just picked up a good hand, and he 3-bet over top of us. Well, what just happened there? We just showed this guy that we're capable of raise folding with 10 big blinds. So I might use that to my advantage and say, okay, maybe I don't do that every single time now. I'll mix in a shove, versus that guy. But then I'll also go back to raise folding, raise calling. But I'm not going to show him that I'm capable of raise folding every single time. If it's against the same reg, yeah. So understand how to kind of keep players on their toes and deviate, because it's not like I'm not going to be thick-headed and say, well, oh, I just raise folded here to this guy, and it folded around to this again. I'm going to raise, and he shoves again. And I just raise folded again. Maybe he starts picking up on that. Maybe he makes a note on his own game. Maybe he makes a note on us in that game saying, hey, this guy will raise fold with 9 or 10 big blinds. I'm going to just have that in the back of my mind and say, all right, the next time I pick up a hand, I'm going to make the plus EV shove. And maybe I'll do it again. But I'm not going to deviate from 100%. Yeah. So, Alan, you're absolutely right. You need to be aware of your own pattern. So there's definitely balance in that sense. So hopefully that makes sense, and it gets you to understand that, the common rule of thumb that has been taught out there for years in terms of if you have 10 big blinds, you can't do anything else but shove it all in. Well, hopefully you're seeing that there are spots now where it's actually 2, 3, 4 times as profitable to raise, fold, raise, call instead of shoving all in. And actually, if you, not just the Queen 4, but when we did the any 2 card thing, the any 2 card calculation, and we added in the appropriate calling range, it's 3 times as profitable to do it with any 2 cards than to just shove. All right, so let's talk about, well, what if players are going to be 3-betting really, really wide? And we talked about that a little bit, but let's do a button situation. And I showed this in another video that I made as well. Button raised versus 3-bet. Okay. All right. So let's set up the situation. We've got 100, 200, and this is going to be a very key concept here, guys. It's not going to be a repeat of what we just did, because now what we're going to talk about is the importance of pre-ante and post-ante. And this is why, if you remember from session 1, why I said that post-ante period is so important to the value to this play. We're going to do some pre-ante and post-ante calculations. So why don't I start with post-ante? So I think this is a situation where there's 6 players. Yep, so this is another 9-man game that I made, so we can do some easy dollar EV calculations. Yeah, 9-man game. You can see the stack distribution here. I'm on the button with 12.5 big blinds, small blind, big blind. They have the same stack as well. So what I did was I gave myself any 2 cards. I think I just put in a random calling range here. Or maybe something that's close to what your accurate calling range should be. 4s, ace-10 off, ace-8 suited. You might disagree with that range, but the calculator here will tell us whether we're correct or not. Now let's say the small blind and big blind are a little bit aggressive. Okay, so in this situation, and if anybody needs me to repeat it, just say repeat it if you don't remember. It's a 9-man game, 6-handed, 11.5 big blind, or I'm sorry, 12.5 big blinds from the button, small blind and big blind. Our regs, of course, our regs. We're dealing in 3-betting or folding situations, and they both have 12.5 big blinds as well. So there might be a little bit more fold equity. They can assume a little bit more fold equity here compared to when they had 9 or 10 big blinds. So here's a 24% 3-betting range for the small blind, and I gave, let's just say the small blind's a little bit looser. He's a more aggressive player, and I said the big blind is a little bit tighter of a player, and he's got a 16% 3-betting range. Maybe you feel that's tighter. Maybe you feel that's too tight, too loose, whatever. Let's take a look at what this will look like. So this calculation will be important to show a couple things. Okay, so look at the number here, 0.81%. okay, to open up here with any two cards and call with this range. I'm sorry, let me scroll over, this will be easier to see. So it's saying that our calling range should be Ace-10 off, Ace-9 suited, maybe pocket 4s and 5s we should leave out. So those are negative EV spots. So you can see these are what the calling ranges should be. You know, it's funny, Ace-Queen suited, it's not as good as Ace-Jack suited. Essentially, it comes up with these calculations by running through the scenario 100,000 times, and I guess based upon what we have the guy 3-betting with, maybe there's more queens in their range, so Ace-Jack performs better than Ace-Queen. But regardless of that, that's roughly, you know, what your calling range would be in this particular scenario. So if we had the perfect raise call, raise fold range, it's a very profitable spot. And you can see that raise folding with 3 deuce offsuit is 0.57%. So the most important aspect here is that you, one, open up because it's extremely profitable. Extremely profitable. Now, that's versus these ranges and in a post-ante period. What happens if those 3-betting ranges start getting a little bit wider? Okay. So let's say the small blind is the loose player. Okay, for whatever reason, I just chose the small blind. And let's say he is going to, what I have him at before, 23, 24%. Let's say he's going to like 33, 34%. Is this still profitable to open up any two cards? And then also let's make the assumption that we're not going to change our calling range at this point to make our play even more profitable. Let's just say it's exactly the same and we don't even adjust our own game. So let's run through it. You see 0.46. Now, are there hands that become negative EV to open? King, Queen suited, yeah. So obviously you can see it's still any two cards to open. Okay. Now we probably should have added in a few extra hands, probably. It doesn't tell us. We probably should have added in a few extra hands to make it more profitable. But this just means our any two card range open is plus. Doesn't mean we should open 82 cards, right? Why wouldn't you if it's plus EV? I'm showing you that opening with 3 deuce offsuit is plus EV versus a 3-betting range of I apologize. I'm not necessarily following. What I'm saying is that you should play any two cards. You should open up with 3 deuce offsuit and fold it. And the point of having a calling and folding range so that I could show you that here's what your calling range would be in this scenario. This is 6-handed, 9-man game. And actually, if I really widen these guys up, your calling range shouldn't deviate too much, and that's because of the ICM tax. With ICM involved, you really can't widen your calling range too much because you don't have enough guaranteed equity. With chip EV, you can definitely call a little bit wider. Min raise fold was okay. Never mind. Okay, so hopefully I answered it somewhere in there. But the point of me showing you this is that we can open up with any two cards and even call with a very basic range. If we call a little bit wider to compensate for the wider 3-bet, it might be a little bit better. I mean, let's just see. Actually, what I'll do first is, so I just showed that 34% we can. What if we go to 40% 3-betting range? Not sure if this will be negative or not. Okay, I see what you're saying, Alex. So min raise fold was also plus EV. Yeah, that was, yeah, it's definitely plus EV. So versus a 40% 3-betting and a 16% 3-betting, we're still plus EV totally overall. But now you can see there's some hands we shouldn't open up now, right? So we can still open up some good hands. So with this, don't get bogged down by the specifics of, oh, should I open up King 5 and not open up King Deuce? You probably start folding out the bottom of your range and only opening up the top part, or even playing more of an unexploitable game. But hopefully that shows you that this is how wide players need to start 3-betting you to start forcing you to fold some hands or play more of a push or fold game. Now, this is usually more of the I guess like a common scenario in terms of having one aggressive opponent, one not so aggressive opponent. But I remember one time somebody asked me, what if it's like 20%, 25% and 25%? Let's see. Let's just go back to pockets, broadways, suited ace, something like that. Pocket, Broadway, suited ace. Let's take a look at what this looks like. And there's probably a few hands we can't open. So a couple hands. Still, that's pretty close to any two cards for that matter. Okay? So what does all of this mean? And again, I don't want to get bogged down again with should we call with this exact range, because every situation is going to be a little bit different. The ICM is going to be a little bit different. The chip EV scenario is going to be different. What's the point of this? So let's take the 30,000 foot view of it, because this hopefully answers a lot of your questions, and this is the question that many of you had as this course got going, and also a year or two later people were asking me, well, what if somebody starts 3-betting me really wide? What should we do? First of all, I showed that somebody has to start 3-betting you 40% plus in the post-ante period, right? That's what it has to be, and probably around close to 60% total between the small blind and big blind if we're raising from the button, to force you post-ante to not be able to open up any two cards. So does that make sense so far? And that's how wide someone's 3-betting range versus their all-in calling range will have to deviate to force you to either not open or maybe play more of a push-fold type of game. So my default play, remember I talked about having those automatic plays? My automatic play is to open in these spots and then deviate once I've identified maybe that particular reg who will 3-bet me this wide. Okay? So we all have a play that we start with, and also you want to have a base calling range. So if I'm in a 9-man game close to the bubble or an 18-man game at the final table close to the bubble, this is roughly going to be my raise calling range from the button. In many scenarios when I have 10 to 12 big blinds, ace 10, maybe down to like ace 8, ace 8 suited, some bigger Broadway hands. So it's good to have a base range, which you should be able to figure out on your own in your particular game type in different scenarios, and then start deviating from that range a little bit based upon particular players, tighter, looser. You always have to have your game be fluid. And these calling ranges are kind of based upon, definitely more aggressive 3-betters. Yeah, be like water. So hopefully that again gives you the confidence that if you're sitting there with 12 big blinds on the small blind, or I'm sorry, 12 big blinds on the button, and you want to raise, and even though there might be some perceived fold equity from the blinds, how wide they have to 3-bet you in the post-ante stage for it to be not profitable. And it's even more profitable if you have a full table of antes. This is 6-handed. The more players, the more antes, the more valuable the pot. Now, what I said before was, well, what happens if we're pre-ante? I actually want to go back real quick. Actually, that's not the hand. I want to do this. So this is, I'm restarting the scenario, and that was post-ante. What happens if we do pre-ante? How does that play a role? Well, what we can see here is, let's see how much of an effect that has. I think it was like 0.81 post-ante, if we did the calculation just with these ranges. And it's 0.28 pre-ante. You can see there's already some hands that we shouldn't be technically opening, but I'm still opening 82 cards. 0.28 versus 0.81, almost 4 times as profitable in the post-ante period. And then if you happen to have a guy pre-ante who is 3-betting wide, who is incorporating these types of hands, and it starts getting into that range, this will very quickly become, some hands will very quickly become negative EV that we could potentially fold or play more of a push-fold type of game. So there you can see now hands become really negative EV to start calling with, or to start opening with. So it's very important, and that's why I said um, in the first session why the jump from the pre-ante to the post-ante period, your VPIP and pre-flop raise need to go up, because you need to start being more aggressive. The pots are more valuable. There's overall more chips and more money to be picking up on the table. Can you show a hand where, so there's a question that came in from Alex. Can you show a hand where we cannot min raise? I feel like you can just min raise every hand. I think the craziest regs will widen to like 29%. So what do you mean show a hand that we can't min raise? I think that this pretty much showed it. Pre-ante, if players are getting into the 30% range plus, those are spots where you probably shouldn't min raise. But post-ante, you're correct. My default play in post-ante period is to look, every time it's folded to me, my first reaction is I need to open this hand. And then I'll stop myself from opening if there's certain things exist. Maybe I'm maybe I'm committed to a player, maybe there's no regs to my left, whatever it might be. But post-ante, yeah, I'm always looking to open. Pre-ante, I'm still looking to open, and I still will open very wide, and many times any 2 cards. But that's versus your average regs. If you happen to have that reg who doesn't care whether it's pre or post-ante, he's going to 3-bet you a ton, and there's that specific guy, yeah, we need to scale it back versus him. But am I pre-ante 3-betting a lot? I mean, that's a broad statement. Against some players, I will 3-bet small. Some players, I won't. Depends on the scenario. That's something that you need to figure out, what regs are doing that versus you. But many regs don't 3-bet that wide pre-ante. And if they aren't, and if they're more in, again, I'll just use a scroller for ease of purposes. If they're something like this, their 3-betting range includes more of these types of hands, where you're just like 20% and 16%, then you can still open any 2 cards pre-ante from the button and from the cutoff. But the point of showing both is that post-ante is obviously more important. Post-ante is still more profitable. You can open up any 2 cards, and you don't need to be as exact. Even versus really aggressive opponents, you can still open. And you can still see here, if you have average 3-betting ranges in the blinds, you can open up any 2 cards still. Any tighter, and it becomes more profitable. So I hope that answers some of your questions there. So again, can we get into every single situation? No. But it's more the concept rather than specific calling ranges when somebody 3-bets. It's more about frequency and understanding when to stop, when to start and stop, and go back and forth. Okay, so does that make sense so far? All right, if it doesn't, and if you think this is, I'm full of shit here, tell me so we can go through even some more calculations, because I want to nail this down. I want you guys to feel comfortable with this, because usually this is an uncomfortable spot to be in, raising any 2 cards with 10 big blinds. It's not a comfortable spot, and that's why I say the ones that do it, and do it consistently and well, and understand the math and buy into it, those are the ones that are moving up stakes quicker and having more success and higher ROI. Okay? If you don't feel comfortable with it, then you might be making a bad play. If you don't feel that you're doing it in the right spot, you might be making a bad play, a negative EV play, and then it might be better to just stick with, your basic shoving ranges, because at least you know that you're making a plus EV play. And then hopefully, again, the forum and the Skype chat, that if you have questions if you're making the correct play or not, you can post the hands there so we can all help each other out. I have a question. Do you explain why the range is calculated by your program were sometimes so funny, like ace-9 suited? Oh, do you mean like here, like why is it king-queen suited? Why is that negative EV? Is that what you're asking? Maybe. Well, I'll assume that's what you're asking. Well, I'll say, why does it say that ace-jack is negative EV and 3 deuce off is plus EV? the way that this program comes up with the numbers is it goes through 100,000 simulations. We can do 1,000,000 simulations. The reason I'm not doing 1,000,000, and the more simulations you do, the more accurate it is. The reason I'm not doing that is because we'll be here all day waiting. It already takes long enough. I know that I know that Ace Jack is going to be better than 3 deuce offsuit, so I'm not, I'm not concerned about that. But there's something which looked very improbable, not like a plus EV chart, but like a random lottery ticket. Now I'm not exactly sure what you're asking, Michael. So fire away with your question. Hopefully I can answer. Try to be specific in what you were saying popped up. Because if something's irregular on the charts or what it's spitting out, then I want to clarify it. Alex, you had asked, is there some way to use my steal percentage and steal success in my database to see how well I'm min raising? It's actually a good question. That's something I need to. It was really funny is I was looking at that before this course even started, and that's something that I want to look into more myself. I haven't gotten into that specific information in my own database, and it's actually tough to do, but I'll take a look at it, and if I can find specific information and take a look and break it down in terms of when we're having success and when we're not, I'll make a video of that and post it in the forum as well so that everybody has that. So as of right now, I can't sit here and say, yes, go and do this, but I'll look into it. So there's a question. So can you do this down to 6.5 big blinds? So if you raise 2.5 big blinds and fold, you have 4 big blinds left. That's what I said earlier, in that technically you can from a very technical standpoint, but I don't like to because it hinders my my future game and leaves me short equity wise in terms of depleting my equity. So I'll do it down to 8 big blinds typically. I don't go too much shorter than that. Yep. So another thing that I want to point out, and I was actually just saying that as we took our little break there, we can only go through so many examples here. I recommend getting a card owner's EV or an ICMIs or a program like that, and I know they cost a couple bucks, but that's why I recommend using those programs for your own games, even if it's just a free trial. Really make use of it. Use it on a daily basis. Go through your scenarios. I can help you as well. If you need help with this program, you go out and buy it or get the free trial, which just does chip EV calculations, doesn't do dollar EV. I can help you with it. But again, if you don't want to get any of the programs, or if you've already used up your free trials, use the Skype group, use the forum, and the post your hands there. So let's jump into now one more hand. Actually, I don't have a slide for it. It's just a situation. And this is the situation that I said I was talking with a guy that I'm working with, and he posed this question to me 2 days ago, this specific hand. And this is what I said. In high ICM scenarios, right? High ICM scenarios, can we use this raise fold, raise call strategy in our game? And the answer is yes and no. Okay, so that's the wishy-washy answer. So why am I specifically pointing out high ICM scenarios? And what is a high ICM scenario? It's the bubble of a 6-max, a 9-man, an 18-man, a 45-man. In an 18-man, maybe it's the final table bubble, or the your 4th place. There's that bubble to get to 3rd place. I think it's one of the higher prize pool jumps from 4th to 3rd. So there's some ICM in there to consider. And accordingly, because of that ICM tax, or because of the understanding of ICM, good regs who understand that ICM, they are more likely to 3-bet you when they have the chip advantage over you. Because they know, because of ICM, you can't call without a top hand. Or else it would be, like many people say, ICM suicide. You'd be making a negative EV play. So does that make sense, guys? So high ICM situations, and here's just a quick scenario. a 9-man, which is a 4-man bubble. You're with 10 big blinds. The chip leader has 20 big blinds, and there's 2 other stacks with 7 big blinds. I'm just making that up. Well, you don't want to raise into the 20 big blind stack very often, because if that 20 big blind stack knows what he's doing, he should 3-bet you with any 2 cards pretty often. Because he can. He knows that because of the stack distribution, you can't call. And that's really one of the key concepts of ICM in a bubble situation. And if you don't understand ICM, if you don't understand that concept, I don't want to go too far into it, because I know a lot of you guys do, but if you don't, you're just starting, that's fine. I have some reading material, just like a PDF, to help you with that, that I can give you afterwards. So, hit me up for that. But this is what I want to talk about. And here's a high ICM scenario that was proposed to me. The player here, this is a $30 or $60 18-man game. Okay? There are 6 players left, I believe. Yep. Our reg here on the button has a 7K stack at big blind 400. The big blind has a 10 big blind stack, right? The rest of the players, there's no short stack, they have average stacks. The big blind had a 10 big blind stack, but it was a very good, very aggressive reg that this player already had marked as very aggressive, that 3-bets a ton. Doesn't matter whether they have 10 big blinds, 11 big blinds, he will 3-bet a ton. And he will 3-bet this player that I'm working with because he knows that he can open up with any 2 cards. So in this ICM scenario, this is again 6-handed in an 18-man game. One more, 5-handed is the bubble, 4 make the money. What should we do with pocket 8s on the button? A good hand like pocket 8s. Should we raise call because it's a good hand, and if the player is 3-betting wide enough, and the 3-betting range that he gave him was something like, was something like this, like all these suited connectors, maybe knocking out 3-4 suited, Jack 9 off, 10 9 off. This was the average 3-betting range that he gave him. So pretty wide, right? With 10 big blinds, especially 3-betting into the chip leader. That's another aspect. The shorter stacks 3-betting into the chip leader, which may not be the greatest play anyway, but knowing that, we can make the appropriate play. So roughly 34-35% 3-betting range. So what do you guys think? Because he's 3-betting so wide, should we raise and then force him to 3-bet that wide, or shove where he only calls with King Jack, pocket 5s, and like Ace 8? Yep. So the issue here is he's not going to call an all-in with that range. He's going to call an all-in with roughly, what was it? What did I just say? Like King Jack, Ace 8, like Ace 8 hands, King Jack, pocket 6s, that type of range. So shoving and getting called by that range, or raising, maybe inducing the Ace Deuce shove, the 4-5 shove. What's going to be better? No, this is an 18-man, 6-handed. Right, so there's definitely some ICM involved. So a couple of people are saying induce, a couple of people are saying to shove. Let's take a look. So in this situation, I have it set up as raise to 800 and essentially induce the 10 big blind shove, and we're going to call with pocket 8s. Okay, so it's 0.96, right? It's 0.96 to raise call. So that's pretty plus EV, right? Well, that's not what we're comparing. We're not seeing if it's plus EV. I know that it's going to be plus EV. What we want to see is what's better. So do you guys think now that shoving is going to be better than 0.96? So let me clear this out. Oh, whoops. So let's give I think we agreed something like this. What do you want to go wider, Alex? Okay. If you want to make it tighter, this guy is. We're not talking about most regs. This guy is extremely wide. Wide with his three betting range, aggressive. He calls wider. This is a very specific situation versus this player. So I'm widening him up a little bit more. So let's shove it all in. And there we go, 1.07. So in um, in this spot, because of the ICM, shoving is going to be better. We actually don't want to induce a wide 3-bet with a marginal hand, even when we have the chip lead. I went through here and figured out it'd be better to raise to induce with ace king and pocket tens. Okay, so that's what we came up with. It was ace king off and pocket tens. You're better off inducing versus these similar ranges. Okay, so that's very important to note, because I don't want you guys now to go into your games, go onto the bubble, and raise into the chip leader and say, oh, he's not going to flat, he's only going to 3-bet or fold. Well, he might be 3-betting a shit ton, depending upon the situation, especially if he's got you covered. So you have to understand those dynamics. And when you are versus a very aggressive player in a high ICM scenario, it is better many times to just play the plus EV push fold game. That's your optimal play. Your optimal play is just to shove it all in. Yeah, I mean, actually, ace king versus these exact ranges, I think it was almost exactly equal. Raise calling was pretty much the same as shoving all in. So ace king suited would be better. I still min range call versus guys like this because you can prove a wide min range call range here in futures games. You can give them. Okay, so I agree. If I played this hand, I would think open shove is best. However, I still min raise call versus guys like this, because if you can prove a wide min raise call range here in future games, you can get them to give you blinds more in spots that are very valuable. So again, that's adding in other variables, adding in another metagame. That's essentially another topic for another day in terms of how to deal with this guy moving forward. A raise call is obviously plus EV. A shove is more plus EV. That's what we're going for. But again, looking at the 30,000-foot view of this, I'm pointing this spot out because in high ICM scenarios, the raise call, raise fold strategy can be whatever you want to use. It can be inferior to playing unexploitable. Okay, because players are not necessarily exploiting you. They are exploiting the ICM of the situation. But in this hand, the small blind stood out. Yeah, I disregarded the small blind. I just said, let's say he's not even in the hand. He's going to affect the overall profitability of the play, but we want to find out what we're doing against this specific guy. So I don't necessarily care about the overall play. We're looking at what happens if you don't want to make the small blind sit out, put yourself in the small blind and him in the big blind. It really doesn't matter. We're more looking at the difference of raising versus shoving in a high ICM scenario. So the only factors that really matter here are the stack distribution of the other players at the table. And I said that there's average stacks there, so nobody's really short. And obviously what his ranges are. So that's what I wanted to point out here. So that's a key concept to differentiate in terms of when to use the raise fold, raise call strategy. Now, with that being said, when you start approaching the bubble, when you're approaching 7-handed, 6-handed, 5-handed, you know that the players to your left, those are the players to your left now. So you want to figure out, how are they going to react to you? What are they letting you get away with? If a player is letting me get away with raising them, then hey, I'll keep doing it. But you want to find out very early how those players are going to react to you and use that to your advantage. If you raise and a guy ships it in on you, okay. If you do it again and he 3-bets you, I think now you know that you probably need to play unexploitable there, and then you know for future games as well. So that's how you kind of figure out what the best strategy is going to be versus those types of players if you don't have a ton of history on them. All right. So does that make sense? High ICM scenarios, how those differ than what we were talked about before. The other scenarios had some ICM involved, but high ICM makes a big difference. Alrighty. So we talked about this already, but who are the ideal villains that we're up against? The ABC regs, guys. Those are the majority of your regs. Average stats. If you haven't, we always bring up, well, what if a guy is 3-betting you really wide? We obviously showed how wide someone needs to 3-bet you pre and post ante. And quite frankly, most players are not doing that. When they are, note them and move on. And use that to your advantage. So the key concepts are, we can use these raise fold, raise call strategies in spots where the player to your left is not going to call your raise, so he's not a random. Versus randoms, like I said, push, fold, 10 big blinds, push or fold. Don't post a hand in the forum and in the Skype chat where you had 10 big blinds, you raised, and somebody called you, and you say, what the hell, why didn't this work? The guy called me. And then they say, well, who's that guy? Oh, he was playing 42-20. That's not the guys you're supposed to be doing this against. And also, it works ideally in situations where their 3-betting range is not drastically going to be different from their all-in calling range. And you can make a really good assumption of that when you're facing 10, 9, 8 big blind stacks. Their 3-betting range are often value hands that they're comfortable with showing down because they assume minimal fold equity. Okay? And for players to really exploit this, as I said, they need to 3-bet you wide and 3-bet you often. Okay? Now, versus very aggressive opponents, as we saw with the post-ante play, we can open up through players that are 3-betting upwards of 40% and it still be profitable. Okay? Pre-ante, you definitely need to be a little bit more careful because there's less of a pot to pick up. Okay? And as I said, when dealing with ICM, when you're in a raise call mode, as that ICM tax, as the bubble factor starts to increase, your calling ranges will very rarely, even versus wide 3-betting range, they're not going to get too out of control. I don't think I went through the difference, but in one of those scenarios where I was going through the ICM, I think it was when I showed the any 2 card open, and I increased the player's range from 20 to 30 to 40%. Your calling range, when considering ICM, 6-handed and a 9-man, for example, it only differs by a couple hands in terms of what you should be calling with. So ICM, get comfortable with it. Be careful that you don't start calling too wide because it could be a negative EV call. So if you aren't sure, definitely err on the side of being more conservative with your calling range. It's one thing to raise fold. It's another thing to raise call too lightly and risk your entire stack unnecessarily. Okay? So, and this applies to ICM as well, you need to ask yourself, when you raise and somebody 3-bets you, are they exploiting a situation? Is it the final table bubble? Is it the actual money bubble? Do they have the chip lead? Is there a real short stack at the table? If those are just situations that players can exploit you with their 3-bets if you decide to open through them and they have you covered. So be careful of those spots. All right? And yeah, so conclusion, obviously it says there, have faith. You want to keep thinking, optimal versus plus EV, optimal versus plus EV. What's the best play? Okay? And that's going to be, that's where I leave it up to you. I do my best here to give you the general guidelines, the general rules that you need to follow. Hopefully get you thinking outside the box of standard play, and then you can apply that to your own game. Especially as it applies to the 10 big blind shove. Hey, you know what? We can raise instead of shove, and that'll be very powerful. But a lot of it goes to buying into this concept, into the raise folding with 9 big blinds, 10 big blinds, 8 big blinds, and it can be 3-4 times as profitable compared to an all-in shove. And it also allows you to play more hands instead of feeling that you can only shove 30% profitably. Well, if you know you can raise fold with 3-deuce offsuit, that's another profitable play that you put in to your game. And remember when I talked about that jar, that every game is an empty jar and you're dropping money in every time you make a plus EV play? This is another play that you can drop money in that you might have been missing before. So with that being said, guys, so any questions on that stuff Went through hopefully a good amount of calculations to get you start thinking, get you to start applying this to your game. Um, obviously, just like the last session, when you're incorporating this now, drop tables, be careful, start thinking about these spots. When you get comfortable, then you can start adding in more tables. But with that being said, are there any other questions? You guys have had some great questions so far, so I appreciate that. All right, so no questions coming in. All right, I'll leave you guys with that. So there's a question. How many times does a reg have to 3-bet you to know you're being exploited? Yeah, that's a good question. That's kind of subjective. Usually I either base it upon the frequency or what players have shown down against me. The 3-bet versus hero stack can kind of let you know that if you're using Hold'em Manager 2. Getting back to that pocket 8's hand, when that player said, this guy 3-bets me really wide, well, how did he know that he was being exploited? Well, in that hand, actually, I forgot to mention this. That guy 3-bet shoved Jack-9 offsuit in that hand versus a chip leader. So that, like I said, 10 big blinds in that pocket 8's hand. The guy who I said was really aggressive, 3-bet shove, Jack-9 offsuit. So he knew for a fact that this guy was pretty damn wide, and that's how he noted him. So many times you won't know unless you either get a note on their frequency or they show down a hand. And another way to do that is by going through your database of hands after you're done playing and selecting the player you want to search for, filtering out all-in situations or 3-betting situations, and starting to see how wide somebody might be 3-betting you. All right, so that's a good question. And the quicker you realize that, the quicker you identify somebody, and this goes with any note you take, the quicker you identify a player's tendency, the better. Yep. So have faith. Not everybody's going to 3-bet you now out of control. There's a handful of guys that will do it, certainly in your games. Some players will pick up on it, but most of your players will not. Think about even some of the best regs. They're multi-tabling. They're playing 20, 30 tables sometimes. Many times they don't have the ability to spot every single spot and exploit you. So that's another good thing to keep note of as well. All right, guys. So with that being said, stay tuned for session 3, which is tomorrow. It's going to be at the same exact time, and we'll get into some more anti-strategies. Yep, some more to come. So any questions, post in the Skype chat or in the forum, and I'll get to them. Thanks, guys.